everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to have a panel discussion of sorts on the topic of the role of intersectionality in board service. My name is Joe Benfatti, and I am our North American, for RSM, public accounting firm, the North American Pride ENG leader. And one of the things that we have been focused on in December, we meet as a group of all of our ENGs. We have 13 ENGs at the firm, and we all meet together every December to kind of plan out the next year's activities. And one of the priorities or one of the focus areas was, in fact, the role of intersectionality. And one of my personal areas of passion is particularly advising my constituency in the Pride group. We have about 3,000 members in my firm of the Pride group, including participants, affinity members, and allies, is to learn how to articulate better the totality. I call it, what is your pride? Because we want to offer and get folks to articulate the various dimensions of themselves that bring their authentic selves to work. And as we all know, there are multiple iterations or multiple facets of an individual's talents, strengths, and personality, and and just your life and what you bring to your profession. And it's a particularly important aspect. Particularly nowadays, when we're working such a distributed environment across the world. So we've brought an excellent panel of specialists who can speak to this in their own personal journeys across the spectrum, including up to and including board service and wanting to share their stories. So good morning and all. I will turn it over to Fabrice. He can introduce himself and the panelists.
Well, good morning. My name is Fabrice Houdart. I'm the Executive Director of the newly created Association of LGBTQ plus Corporate Director. It's such a pleasure to be with you today. First of all, because I'm a huge fan of Heather, Maggie, and Esteban. And second of all, because I think it's incredibly progressive of the NSCD Northern California chapter to have been organizing those LGBTQ plus cohort. As you know, this is in the world of governance, LGBTQ plus diversity is a little bit the newcomer or the poor parent of boardroom diversity. And so I'm incredibly grateful to Lisa and the team for organizing these sessions. So I'll jump immediately into the questions, if you don't mind, because we only have an hour, and I know that Lisa runs an extremely tight ship. So my first question is going to be to you, Heather, not only because I think you are at sea, which makes it, incredibly an incredible honor to have you with us, but also because you are the only non-binary identified person on a NASDAQ board. And so my first question to you, Heather, will be, can you tell us how you came to have the opportunity to self-identify? But also tell us a little bit about your board journey as a person of color, but as a woman, and also as a self-identified non-binary person.
Sure. I've always, self-identified as what we now call non-binary. However, we didn't have that language when I was coming to my full identity. So it has been something in the background that I didn't necessarily feel the need to promote, I guess I should say, and was comfortable with the pronouns she and her. But as I joined the board of a company called Udemy back in 2020, when we were writing up when the lawyers were writing up the proxy statements and the documentation for going public, they asked me if I wanted to identify as non-binary, and I said yes, to use the they, them pronouns. Not so much for myself. I actually respond to any pronoun, from he, him to she, her, but because I felt that there were people who would read the language and feel like there was somebody they could identify with out there in the world, and that they too could join the board of a company that was going public. And that was really the impetus and the reason why I decided to sort of come out as non-binary.
Well, I think that's wonderful, and it might actually get a little bit of coverage this year as the NASDAQ self-disclosure get consolidated. And so far, I have to say that you're the only person I know of that has identified as non-binary in this disclosure. And there are two trans women that are very prominent in the boardroom, but they do identify as women. And so, in a way, that's kind of a big development. And I think, as you know, already a lot of boards have difficulties grappling with sexual orientation being an aspect of demographic, so let alone gender identity. So Heather, I'll come back to ask you, how you ended up on the board of Udemy, but thank you so much. So Maggie, it's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to see you. You are part of a small number of lesbians that made it to the boardroom. And so my question to you will be, first of all, you have kind of an atypical profile because your background is in communications. And as you know, there is always a huge preference for people that are either CEO or CFOs or have some level of scientific maybe knowledge to be on the board. What was your board journey? And also what I wanted to know is, did you identify as a lesbian prior or, meaning to your boardroom prior to being hired as a board member or after being hired as a board member?
I've been pretty outspoken in my corporate affairs roles about the need to advance inclusion and equality. And I have to say, Fabrice, I faced a lot of resistance in corporate roles on, legislative items, on programs that were far out in front on inclusion before it was fashionable. And so I always felt, both as a woman and as a lesbian, that it was really important to get people like me in the boardroom because I knew that's where the power resided. And so I was mentored by a straight white man who actually got me into the Harvard program for women corporate directors. And you have to be nominated, and they select you based on kind of the value of your nomination and that kind of thing. It's a bit exclusive, unfortunately, but I made it in, and I met an incredible group of women that were in my class. And then I, kind of reached out to people that I knew that I had worked with in senior roles. And interestingly, many of the out gay executives that I worked with were some of my best channels to board seats. In fact, in both instances, they were the people that introduced me to the nominating and governance committees of the companies that I'm currently sitting on the board of. So that big old gay network got me into the seat. And I can tell you that having people who have a sense of what it means to be in an environment that hasn't always embraced gay and lesbian people is really, really powerful and really meaningful. And I encourage all of the people that reach out to me to continue your journey to open doors, to make connections, because I think we need more people in the seats of power so we can direct kind of the market and businesses and influence policy around inclusion in companies. So that's a little bit about my journey. I can tell you it's been incredibly rewarding, and I've loved every minute of it.
Well, I love that. And Maggie, I'm a terrible moderator, but I didn't ask you to summarize what had been your career in corporate affairs before. Can you tell us briefly what you did in your career?
Yeah, I worked in politics early in my career. I worked for a senator from Delaware, and I later got into working in public relations and agency world. And then I was recruited by a headhunter to be the global head of communications at Cigna, the health insurer. And then from there, I was recruited over to Johnson & Johnson. So I led global communications and public affairs at Johnson & Johnson, which, was an incredible experience because of the scale of the company. And was recruited to an energy company after that. And then at the beginning of COVID, I really set my sights on board directorship and wanted to launch my own consultancy. So I launched my consultancy in 2020 and was elected to 2 boards at that time. And so, at the same time, the mayor of the District of Columbia asked me to serve as vice chair of the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. So I serve in that board capacity as well, which has been an incredible experience. The district gives away about $50 million in arts funding every year, and we've really set our sights on making it more inclusive spending. And we've made a lot of progress. So that's a little bit about me.
I have to say that that this is a really impressive career, and you know, it's wonderful to see that that you credit the Gay Network for helping you, getting your first board seat. Because as you know, the first board seat is very often difficult to obtain. And then I noticed that when you talked about your early career in politics, Heather perked up, because Heather, besides being a board member extraordinaire, has been very involved in the previous election cycles in raising money for key candidates. So maybe you and Heather can talk together at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So Esteban, Esteban, it's a pleasure meeting you. I have to say that this morning I listened to a little recording you had done with Lisa previously, and in which you mentioned that you get your first board seat at 48. And then I felt incredibly jealous, because we are pretty much the same age, and I have not made that many accomplishments. But you are a technical person. And so to me, it's fascinating to think that you end up finding your way in the boardroom, particularly at such an early age. Can you talk a little bit how you got into it? Did you stumble upon your board seat, or was it a very intentional move?
Oh, well, thanks, Fabrice, for asking, and thank you everyone for being here today. So I would say that it was very intentional. And the point that you made, saying that I'm a very technical person, is actually one of the challenges that I've faced in terms of getting to a board seat, because actually I consider myself a business person who happens to be a physician, as opposed to just a physician who dabbles in business. I started looking for my first board seat at 44. At the age of 40, I was the president for Blue Cross and Blue Shield for Southwest Texas. So I had P&L responsibility, but I really had not considered board service until I started getting involved in nonprofit boards. And I think when we talk about board service, we have to think about not only diversity of gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but also diversity in terms of backgrounds that you come from. So I come from a very humble background. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, working class folks. So we did not know anyone who served on any types of boards. So it's really hard to be what you don't see, right? So I didn't see any of our family's friends or contacts on boards, be it nonprofit or corporate boards. So initially, it wasn't even a thought of a possibility for myself, especially being a kid from really humble backgrounds from Los Angeles. But at the age of 44, I thought, well, I've been a president now for 4 years. I've been chairman of a board, a nonprofit board at the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and then started thinking, okay, well, how can I start to proceed looking for a corporate board position? And there was no roadmap, much less for a Latino or a gay person. Didn't have a lot of contacts, reached out to a recruiter who said, don't call us, we'll call you, you're too young. And so then set out on a pathway to figure out how can I prepare myself for board service. And that included working with recruiters that were identifying Latinos for board service, such as Russell Reynolds, working with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I did a certificate in corporate governance here at the University of Texas, San Antonio. And at the age of 48, a recruiter reached out to me about a board position that I currently sit on, Addis Home Care. I had worked in home health for 10 years as a medical director. As I mentioned, I'm a practicing physician in addition to being an executive at Google. So within 6 months, I was actually working with the Latino Corporate Directors Association. And my second board seat, which happened about 6 months afterwards, came through that organization. So it really was intentional in terms of creating a path and figuring out what you needed to either learn or what networks you needed to establish in order to gain that first board seat.
No, and I really appreciate you saying that, Esteban, because at the association, what we kind of discovered is that some people that are very qualified to get on a board don't really have any role model, or you mentioned roadmap to get to that board seat, and it looks extremely difficult to understand. What is the process if you don't really have a little bit of resources that say, well, look, you have the NFED accreditation, you have the Harvard program, your network is going to be crucial. Here are a few things you can do to make your profile more visible. Things that maybe the majority, meaning a lot of white straight male, might be aware of, are completely difficult to comprehend for people that are not part of that inner circle. So I think that's a really important point. So coming back to you, Heather, one statistic that I love to mention is that, and I think it comes from a report maybe from a recruiter, which says that about a third of board members believe that board members from underrepresented groups are either unqualified or unneeded. And you're obviously a person of color. You are also a lesbian. You're non-binary. Did you have the feeling when you joined your board that you would have to do double efforts to show your added value? Or was that something that never really crossed your mind? And you were like, okay, well, if they wanted me, I don't really have to show my added value. I'm there, and they will discover how awesome I am over time.
I do think I felt qualified for the board that I joined. It probably was also because Udemy, which is the world's largest learning and teaching marketplace, is in my area of subject matter expertise, meaning it's a learning company. And my subject matter expertise is really learning and talent development. So I felt more than qualified. What was surprising about that opportunity is they asked me while I was building Calbright College, the first statewide online upskilling community college in the country. They invited me to join their board, and I had told the trustees that I would not join any other education or learning related company boards while I was the chancellor and CEO of that college. And so I had to turn them down. This was in 2018 and or 2018. And so when they came back after I resigned from Calbright College in 2020, they asked me, now, are you interested in joining the board? And I thought absolutely, and said absolutely. I guess I knew I was qualified from having that sort of perspective, and my functional expertise is in technology and also in finance. So I knew I could add value, but I did feel, and I still feel actually, that I have so much to learn to be, to add as much value as possible to a public company board. It's funny because there were a couple of instances where I became really close to being offered other public company board opportunities. And in the end, they would say to me, we found other people who have already public company experience. And I'd say, well, how am I supposed to get the experience if I never get put onto the board, invited onto the board? But what happened for me here was I got to join the board, and I first joined the audit committee, where I, again, learned a lot about how to clean up and prepare for the financial reporting that is required with a public company. in a way that I had never had sort of a lens into before, and then helped build the strategic plan and the operations to go public, and served on the pre-IPO committee. We went public last year in 2021, and now I chair NomGov. And so I've learned and have a lot to still learn to add as much value as possible on the board. But I would also say, from the Black perspective, putting the Black hat on, I think we always assume and know we have to perform twice or 3 times or 10 times as well as white men to have an opportunity. So that I always enter a room assuming that part.
Well, I love that. Thank you so much, Heather. And Maggie, if I can switch to you, I don't see you anymore on my screen, but then I confess the fact that I just got an iPad and I have no idea how that works. But my question to you will be, as you can see in our group today, there are few women, right? And one of the experience of the Association of LGBTQ Corporate Directors is that when we have our meetings, as an example, tomorrow, I have a dinner. I think Heather, you might be coming. I have a dinner. I don't know. I'm not sure, because I think you're on the sea. But I have a dinner for people of color in the boardroom in New York City, and it's a majority men. It's very few women. And one of the experience that we have had is that, first of all, lesbians in the boardroom is a small group of people, but then a lot of lesbians look like they are self-excluding from the boardroom. And my question to you is, how would you explain that? It could also be, we know that lesbians tend to not put their sexual orientation at the top of their identity. And so that could partially explain it. But do you think it's a bottleneck to lesbians getting board seats? And also, do you have any idea on how we could get lesbians more involved in organizations like the NACD, or more involved in the overall governance world?
Yeah, it's interesting that you think lesbians are self-excluding. Can you say a little bit more about that? What are you observing?
Well, I'll tell you, I have a joke. I mean, it's because we are together, right? It's not to be repeated outside, but, I say every single gay guy, 28-year-old gay guy on the East and West Coast has been calling us saying that they think they should be on the board of Target. Lesbians don't do that. You know what I mean?
Oh.
We didn't have, most of the lesbians that have approached us are incredibly accomplished, right? And so you have, it could be that we are not on their radar screen. I mean, I have to make a confession, which is that a lot of my network is obviously white gay guys on the East Coast and the West Coast. And, I'm going to make an effort to diversify that. But I kind of came to the conclusion that lesbians are less tempted to say, well, do I have a stake in the boardroom?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have a whole pipeline for you, Fabrice, because they're certainly calling me. So, which is exciting. I mean, I'm thrilled every time I get the call. Very competent out lesbian women who have excelled in corporate roles and who are very interested in entering the boardroom. I still think it's a very difficult pathway. And, one of the things that I say to folks, and I think Heather touched on this earlier, building the competency to get to the boardroom. I completed the NACD certification. I went, as I mentioned, to the program at Harvard. So making sure that you kind of bone up on the skill set helps a lot. And it also creates a greater network. I met a lot of people through the NACD. I spoke at the summit. All those things are helpful in terms of opening doorways to get into the boardroom. But I agree with you. I think there's more that we can do to be intentional about creating a network. As I mentioned to you, I am in my board seats because 2 prominent gay executives recommended me for the role. And I will be eternally grateful to them. And as a result, I'm always finding ways to reach back and help elevate others into roles. So, I don't think there's any shortage of desire. I just think we have to be better organized in terms of how we get everyone connected so that we can open doorways for folks.
That's a great point. Yeah,
I'd love to build on that if I may. I agree with Maggie wholeheartedly. There's actually a backlog of completely talented, qualified women, LGBTQ, and people of color who just haven't had an entryway, haven't had the portal open up for them. And so I just, you may not know them, but we do, and they do exist. I also wanted to agree with Maggie in the point that you can build a lot of the skills and demonstration and demonstrate your qualifications and your readiness. I've served on over a dozen nonprofit boards, from NCLR to the Alonzo King Lions Ballet, and a lot of the governance things that you learn and the fiduciary responsibilities are very similar and relevant, and a great stepping stone. I also served as a school board commissioner in San Francisco Unified School District, where you're working with similar size budgets and dealing with facilities and these kinds of issues. And that has helped me get onto the corporate boards that I've on and prepared me. So I think that that's also the case, that there are so many important stepping stones that you can take even while you're being, getting ready, so that you don't have to, so that you are really ready when the opportunity comes your way.
No,
Yeah, and I think Fabrice, if I could just jump in for a second, one thing I wanted to just mention is, Heather and I both serve on the NomGov committees I do on both of the boards that I'm on. And, it would be interesting to take the Fortune 200, see who leads the NomGov committee, and provide them a list of people who are interested in serving. That might be one way of getting at it. But I do think that there is an entree point with Nom and Gov leaders. And this, I know at this point of the year, in both of the boards that I serve on, we're actually doing an assessment of board capabilities and where we have gaps and where we might need new directors, 2-3 years out. And I guess we could be a little more intentional about that, about putting people forward.
I was very
Sorry,
intentional.
I think, Joe, go ahead.
I was going to say I was very intentional about wanting to chair NomGov, because I do want to pay this forward, this opportunity forward. And we are searching for 2 new directors at the Udemy board right now. We have Spencer Stewart team is leading the search for us, and I selected them as our search firm because they focus and prioritize in finding diverse candidates. And so if you're interested in that opportunity, we're growing like gangbusters in our enterprise side of the business globally. It is really a truly remarkable company. And so I think that what Maggie is saying is exactly right. And a lot of times people undervalue the NomGov committee because they don't care about what I care about, which is making sure that I can add more people to the table and broaden the diversity of the boardroom.
And Esteban, you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to talk about as well is that it can be pretty expensive to prepare yourself for board service, right? So the Harvard program, joining NACD, joining LCDA, all the organizations that you would want to join and or courses that you want to take may be cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So thinking about potential scholarships or targeting, if we're targeting specific populations, I actually benefited from a scholarship at the University of Texas, San Antonio that was targeted to Latinos. So all our cohort was Latinos. I wasn't necessarily looking for that, but I definitely took it. So we have to recognize that there may not be generational wealth in a lot of populations that has discretionary money to do all of these programs. I had my first kid at 19. By the time I was 40, I had a 20-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 14-year-old, right? So we have to recognize some of those things.
Well, first of all, I love that point, Esteban. I never heard it, but it does make a lot of sense. Maggie, can I be extremely vulgar and ask you who paid for the Harvard Business School program? Did you pay yourself, or did you manage to get someone to pick up the bill?
No, and Esteban makes a great point, and it'd be interesting to explore financial support for folks in our community. But I was nominated by the chairman of the board of the company that I worked for at the time, and the company financed it as an executive development program for me. Similarly, for the NACD certification, when I joined the board, Vistagen, they had a program for new board members, and they kind of covered the cost of the membership and also board directorship, just building credentials in certain areas. So I went through the certification, which I found really helpful in some of the areas where I didn't have, a lot of muscle memory in terms of audit and finance and accounting and some of the regulatory constructs. But having that now makes you, in one board, you could be thought of as a candidate for succession to chair. So, which I think is also really important for all of us to aspire to do. But in both instances, I, like Esteban, was given financial assistance for those.
You're smart, Maggie. I have to say, I'm going to do a little bit, but I'm going to tell you that I have a deal with NSCD Accelerate that, if someone joins the cohort now, it's $5,130, I think this month. And then, it's going to go up to $5,700 for members of the association. Like the price for NSCD Accelerate is $6,500. But if you join this month, I got a deal for $5,130. And it's basically an LGBT cohort. And I have to say that one of my members dropped out because it was too expensive. But I have other members that managed to get their employers, even non-profit, to pay for the NSCD Accelerate program.
But perhaps you could just talk a little bit about what the Accelerate program is, because I think people don't necessarily have a context.
Well, so NSCD Accelerate is great because it includes the NSCD accreditation, but it's also a program for people that do not have a board seat. It's basically the only program of NSCD for people that do not yet have a board seat. And what it does is that on top of the accreditation, it gives you a membership to NSCD, which I think the accreditation is probably $3,500. The membership is $1,300. So it's really to the point of Esteban. It's not for people that are on a budget. And then what it does is that it has activities to kind of specifically create a pipeline of new talent for the boardroom. So it's kind of a package for 2 years. And so, I get this special deal, right before they are increasing the price for the package. One other thing that I wanted to say, and I love what you said, Heather, is that the reason we created the association is that we kind of realized that all the other underrepresented groups are helping each other. And they kind of know each other and they call each other and they say, by the way, there is that opening, or someone has called me, do you know someone? And as LGBT people, we have not been doing that. And very often what really strikes me in the dinners we organize is that people do not really know each other, meaning that there is very good networking in the community, but the networking is not taking place around the boardroom. And so other minorities, African-American, Latinos that are very good at it, Asian Americans have been better at picking up the phone and saying, look, there is that opportunity, do you know someone? And that's something we want to foster. So I love what you said, Heather. Esteban, going back to you, as you know, the first board seat is only the beginning of the journey, right? In a way, people talk about a board career and they say, well, look, I'm positioning myself to chairing a committee. I'm positioning myself to going to a bigger board. How are you looking? You're very young. I mean, you're basically a board baby. Maybe not in the gay world, but in the board world, you're a baby. How are you looking at your future board career? Do you make a plan? Are you already thinking, oh, this is a committee I want to chair? How are you managing this? Going beyond the beginning of your board career.
Yes, so I'm absolutely making a plan. So thinking about the type of boards that I want to sit on in the future, the size of the company, myself, I really want to get out of just healthcare boards and diversify the types of board service that I have, because as a physician, clearly I tend to be pigeonholed into healthcare. So thinking of other types of companies that I can add expertise or governance to. And so just like there was a roadmap to getting on your first board, there's a roadmap to getting on other types of boards or larger boards, at least one that I'm developing for myself, which includes continuing to network and continuing to get to know folks on the types of boards that I'm interested in. Incidentally, I'm very interested in dollar stores. I actually had, when I was doing my certification, I was studying Dollar Tree and Family Dollar, and so I was thinking as I was studying them, well, there's a great opportunity for healthcare in this space that's not being exploited, or the fact that you could use these type of stores to do money transfers or other types of things for unbanked populations, which if you have a primarily white board that's, you know, upper class, upper middle class, they may not have that life experience to really think about that. And so those are some of the things that I'm preparing myself. To your point, as a board career, I'll have a career that from a corporate perspective will likely end in the next 10 to 15 years, but I anticipate continuing board service well into my retirement from corporate America.
Oh, I love it, Esteban. So basically you have an outlook on retirement that is very French, which is, you know, the French retirement age is incredibly early. My question to you is visibility. Does visibility count as a board member? And how can you make yourself more known in the governance world? Meaning, you know, those big public boards we're talking about, how can you make yourself as an existing board member kind of little by little notice you as a powerhouse in the governance world?
Who was that question for, Fabrice?
It was for you, Esteban. Like, have you thought about?
I would say that organizations like NACD, so definitely becoming member, be it of NACD, LCDA, there's organizations for African Americans, for Asians, obviously for LGBT. Those are going to be your networks that you need to connect with. Going to dinners, meeting recruiters, participating in events like this are pathways that you need to take in order to be able to get either your first board seat or your subsequent board seat. You need to let folks know that you're interested in board service. You need to let folks know what are the board competencies that you bring to the table, which is very different from the competencies you might have for a particular job. When I was developing my board resume, which looks very different from my professional resume, understanding those board competencies and really delineating them is going to be important. So I would say network, continuing to expand your network, talking to people, letting them know that you're interested. For instance, one of the attorneys, outside attorneys that serves on one of our boards as external counsel, he invited me to a dinner in Nashville to meet other board organizations that he also services as an attorney. So those are the type of opportunities you need to take advantage of. Heather mentioned Spencer Stewart. I mentioned Russell Reynolds. I know Korn Ferry and others have specific type of programs or dinners or mixers. Go to those. You might feel out of place initially, but the more you go and the more you get to know people, the better it is long term.
I love that.
Elizabeth Mora has a question.
Yeah, Elizabeth, going to you.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to make a comment, and that is that the last time we met and talked about this, I believe within this group, was we talked about the idea that we needed to lead with our capabilities and our skills, and sort of an added benefit is our LGBT plus demographic, and I still think that's true. If you look at my LinkedIn, I have a background with a flag, and actually I would like to take it off, but I don't know how to take it off. But it's not important to me to do the research to find out. But being on 4 publics as I am now, it's something that is sort of comes up, but it's just like anything else. It's an aside. It's not the lead in. And you know, the longer I'm on these boards, the more I talk about it in the context of my wife, we, et cetera, and people, because they know me and they know my competencies, it's not threatening at all. It's sort of, yes, one more thing. But I am giving a talk, to your point about visibility, for NACD New England in April about how to land your first board. And I'm preparing in my head the outline. And I think it's the first time I will speak publicly about this particular demographic. So I'm excited about that. And I encourage everybody to lead with their skill and think of it as a plus to the skill, that the boards are getting a plus demographic attribute. Thank you.
No, I think it's a great point. Yeah, because, you know, a lot of board members think that LGBT board members are going to be completely focused on DEI, and that's basically what they want to bring to the table. And very often what I say to people is I say, look, our candidates are boring type A personality. No offense, Maggie and Heather and Esteban. But I'm joking, but what I mean is that they tend to be extremely accomplished individuals who, of course, care about diversity, but that's not what they're bringing to the table. And there is sometimes a bit of suspicion.
Yeah, I thought Elizabeth's points were very well taken. And I do think there's some importance here, because I'm a communicator at heart, in building one's personal brand and to being very intentional about that, Fabrice. You know, if you look at your LinkedIn page, you know, have you optimized your networks? Have you articulated your competencies? You know, are you leading with those companies, as Elizabeth said so artfully? You know, I think there are ways that you can be very intentional about what is the red thread that runs through your brand and how are you representing that on social. You know, even when you do things, you know, I was called by a reporter at Fortune magazine to talk about CEO succession from a board perspective. I did that, you know, I posted it on LinkedIn, I optimized it with a network, and, you know, I got a lot of calls from headhunters, from people who are non-gov committees. But I would just encourage you all, you know, when you're thinking about positioning yourself for your first board, to think about your personal brand and how it's reflected on some of your social sites, particularly LinkedIn, which can be a really helpful tool for networking.
And you know, Maggie, next week, the association is hosting a webinar on LinkedIn in which we are bringing 4 kind of influencer, you know, professional influencers on LinkedIn to talk about how to maximize your audience, you know, how to use the capabilities of LinkedIn. So Elizabeth, we might even be able to help you change your background during the webinar. But we are doing a little webinar next week exactly on that topic, because, you know, even though you're never going to get a board seat because of your LinkedIn, you can bet that everybody on the nominating and governance committee, the first thing that they will do is look at your LinkedIn. So I love this. Anybody else have a question?
Here's another idea, just one other idea. You know, I'm chair of NomGov in a couple of cases, and I chair a board in another case. Where there's a board that you're interested in and it's all white guys who identify as heterosexual or whatever, write to and it looks like they're long in tenure, write to the chair of NomGov and put your bio and then put the LGBT characteristic at the bottom, because they know they have to add, they know they have to. So if you get in front of them, it could be an advantage. You know, as I've said to Fabrice, there's so many ways in. There's top down, there's bottom up, there's sideways contacts. I get those letters and I respond to those letters because I have to, and that's part of being the chair of NomGov. And, you know, if you target your search around looking at proxy statements where there's long tenure, no diversity, in a business where you have a capability, the odds are in your favor, you know, versus not in your favor.
No, I love it, Elizabeth. And what I think too is that, as you know, this proxy season, we will finally know how many LGBT people are on NASDAQ board. And even though nobody has collected the data, I suspect it's not going to be too good, meaning that it's probably going to be below 1%. And so what I'm hoping is that this will mean that suddenly companies will be like, it would not be too bad if our next board member happens to be part of the LGBT community. And so I'm very hopeful that after this proxy season, demand will pick up.
Fabrice, one of the things I want to mention, and piggybacking on what Elizabeth is saying, is that you want to strike while the iron's hot, right? So right now is a time where boards are looking for diversity. I'll be the first to admit that maybe 5 or 6 years ago, stating that you were LGBT was not going to get you on a board seat, right? It wasn't a safe space. Right now, it's much safer than it was previously. And so taking advantage of that opportunity to show what you bring to the table, and because boards are looking for diversity, putting yourself out there and talking about not only what you bring to the table from a competency perspective, but what you bring to the table from a diversity perspective as well.
I love that, Esteban. And I have to tell you, I had a bit of an experience. 3 LGBT people get prominent board seats in the past months. And we announced 2 of them, pretty progressive companies. But the third one didn't really want the association to announce his appointment. And he has been a bit discreet about his sexual orientation. And frankly, the reason is because he's in the manufacturing industry in the middle of America. And I could feel that he was still feeling, well, it might be awkward at my first board meeting if I come in as the LGBT guy. And so, you're right, like things are changing, but there are still people that are wondering, is that going to make it awkward? And should I mention it? So we still have a bit of advocacy to do.
Fabrice, that's true, but someone has to go first. And, the more we read and hear and, marriage, not marriage, everybody knows somebody who's gay and has somebody in their family or both, or this one, or a child. So it's through that connection that we make change. It's one by one by one by one. And you get on the board, you're a success, you made it. Here's another idea. I was used before we even talked about it. We didn't talk about it at all. I was on the board for a number of years. Now we talk about it all the time, appropriately. The CEO called me. We had never spoken about my lesbian status. He said, I've got a candidate, LGBT. Will you have dinner with the person? I said, sure. So it's another angle in, right? We can help attract and retain people.
Completely. And the other thing is that what I believe is that when Esteban, Heather, Maggie, you, Elizabeth, are out board member, what it does is that it dispels this myth that LGBT people are unneeded or unqualified, right? Because the idea that we are unqualified doesn't stand when you look at the individuals that are in the boardroom, right? I love to say that Caroline Bertozzi has a Nobel Prize in chemistry. How many board members have a Nobel Prize? And I think, very often people they have this idea of the LGBT candidates as riding on their LGBT status, not understanding that there are amazing professionals that happen to be LGBT. So I really like your point. Is there any other question I would have missed because I don't know how to use my iPad?
Please feel free to speak up or make comments.
I wanted to add one more thing from the founder entrepreneur perspective, because, it's kind of my life to be on sometimes a less beaten pathway, if you will. But I've noticed, it's a wonderful resource when you can get sponsorship and you've been at big name companies, and you can get some, hopefully, support from your companies, and you should totally tap into all of that opportunity. But in case any of you are like me, where you have founded a lot of organizations, I was the CEO of a company that I sold in 2015, a tech company, but it was small and not known by a ton of people, especially outside of the learning space. And it's sometimes harder to get sort of attention when people are used to the C-suite of positions at large companies. And I don't have the perfect answer of how to break through to that, but I wanted to at least acknowledge that I think some of these other networks and letting your bona fides be known in that way, possibly with investors who have invested in your company. I've noticed that that's a way to sort of get some attention, talk to VCs and private equity firms that know what you've accomplished with your own company and in the investment space. So, you know, even if you haven't been in the C-suite of a large company, Fortune 1000 company or whatever, there still are pathways and ways for you to get onto corporate boards.
And I think increasingly, Heather, in the sense that, you know, for a very long time when I received the first specs, what I found crazy is that everybody said CEO preferred and existing board member preferred, which, you know, I joke meant, you know, one of us.
Right.
And I think that's changing.
Right. Chicken and egg, you can't break in that way. Yeah. But I realized that my pathway to being on a public company board was by going through the public, you know, the IPO process with them. And now I don't have the first problem anymore. And I'm also realizing there's a certain kind of expertise in having gone through preparing to go public. And so I want more of those experiences with other pre-IPO companies.
I love that. Holden, so nice seeing you.
Hey, Fabrice, hello. I just wanted to add, I mentioned in the chat, so just to keep an open mind for different kinds of boards. So my area is around institutional investing, investment management, so mutual fund boards. The other thing I would say is the networks can go in many different directions. So, you know, Damon and I met on because I was a mentor, volunteered for the Black Corporate Board Readiness Program at Santa Clara. And I find actually just getting involved in that, you fish where the fish are. So you are hanging around where board members are, where people are looking for board members. And that's been really wonderful. And then lastly, one thing I've been doing personally, just because it's interest, is actually working in areas for new entrepreneurs and new fund managers. And there are actually tons of programs now for new GPs and new entrepreneurs. And I would say you just never know, because those new companies and those new funds are probably also areas for creating opportunities, because they will all need governance. And it doesn't have to, like in my field, you don't have to go with BlackRock or whatever. There could be new funds and firms that are being created. And that personally, that's been interesting to me. So just wanted to plant those seeds too.
I like that a lot, Holden, and it reminds me of something that Esteban just said, which was to kind of dare going in places that are uncomfortable, because it can be difficult to go in places where there are very little LGBT representation. You know, I just went on vacation with my kids to Club Med, and I had a terrible time, although I have to tell you my kids had a great time. A question to you, Esteban, how do you do that? Meaning, if you go in a place where you feel a little bit out of place because you have a different socioeconomic background, because you are from a different ethnic group, because you are from the LGBT community and maybe you're the only person there. You know, do you have any tips about joining places that are maybe more conservative or where you feel a little bit out of place?
Well, I was an executive at a health insurance company, so that was very conservative. Casual Fridays for us was cufflinks optional. So I would say you just have to be true to yourself. And so it's hard if you don't bring your whole self to work or to the situation, then ultimately you're going to be blocking yourself. And I've seen that. I've led ERGs for Latinos. I've participated in ERGs for LGBT folks. So realizing that you're uncomfortable, but understanding that you belong and not having that imposter syndrome. You know, I live in Texas. I was born and raised in California. I don't hunt. I don't drink scotch. I don't golf. And so you're talking about health insurance executives across the board, you know, especially here in Texas. And very similarly, I sit on a board here in Texas where that's the norm, and finding where you have commonalities, not where you have differences. And so ultimately you will find things in common with folks, but you have to live in that discomfort for a moment, and make sure that you're bringing your authentic self to the situation. Because ultimately, if you don't bring your authentic self, it shows. And you definitely want to be able to do that in order to be able to show folks what you have to offer. Oftentimes, you know, being Latino is the obvious thing that I bring to the table, but perhaps being gay is not, especially since I was married to a woman and I have 3 children. And so oftentimes you're coming out, you know, people aren't asking you when you're interviewing if you're gay or lesbian. Now that's a little bit different. You can obviously I publicly show that I'm gay. I'm very comfortable with that, and I was very comfortable in those situations. But you also have to be comfortable coming out over and over and over again if people don't know that you're gay.
Well, I like that a lot. And I think, you know, another thing, Esteban, is moving as a group. You know, I joke with our members that I want to infiltrate the NACD. I want to infiltrate, you know, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ. You know, we are going to host a party at the next annual meeting of the NACD. I think, you know, if we move as a group, it makes it more comfortable. Lisa, I know you run a very tight ship, so I'm giving it back to you because I think we're coming on to the hour. But I want to express my deep gratitude to Heather, Esteban, and Maggie for sharing their wisdom and experience, and also to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you so much to you all, and thanks again to Joe for hosting. I'd like to just ask for 1 minute if anybody has any subjects that they'd like to have us talk about for our next session. If there's something in particular that you can think of that you'd like to bring up, and you can also feel free to get in touch with me after the session. We had a fantastic panel today. Can't thank you enough, and thanks to Fabrice for moderating. I really enjoyed it, and this hour has gone by so quickly. Thanks to you all for participating.
Great to be with you.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Good luck, everyone.
Of course.
See you very soon.
Good afternoon.